A single tree in a forest shouldn't survive, and the math behind this seems straightforward. Trees compete for sunlight, water, and nitrogen, all finite resources in what looks like a zero-sum game. And yet forests have thrived for 370 million years, not because the strongest trees won, but because they figured out something that would take human strategists until the 21st century to understand. The best way to beat your competition isn't to fight them, it's to make fighting irrelevant. Michael Porter built a career teaching companies how to fight. His 5 forces framework, covering supplier power, buyer power, competitive rivalry, threat of substitutes, and threat of new entrants, became the Bible of business strategy. Every MBA learns it, every consultant deploys it, and every company that follows it ends up in the same place, which is a bloody competition over shrinking margins. But in 1997, while Porter's disciples were drawing competitive moats, a PhD student named Suzanne Simard crawled through the undergrowth of a British Columbia forest carrying plastic bags, syringes, and radioactive carbon isotopes. What she discovered would overturn a century of forestry science and accidentally reveal what Peter Thiel later called escaping competition. The most powerful strategy isn't winning the game, it's changing which game you're playing. Simard found the Wood Wide Web, and once you understand how it works, Porter's 5 forces start to look like a recipe for extinction. The prevailing theory at the time said forests were battlegrounds where every tree fended for itself. Resources flow upward from soil to trunk to canopy. End of story. Competition drives evolution, and the tallest trees win, which is the biological version of Porter's framework where you capture value, defend position, and outcompete rivals. But Simard noticed something strange in clear-cut forests. When loggers removed the big trees, the small ones didn't thrive as expected. They died faster than they should have. It was as if losing the competition had somehow made them weaker. So she designed an experiment that would eventually be published in Nature and inspire her 2021 bestseller, Finding the Mother Tree. She covered Douglas fir seedlings with plastic bags and injected radioactive carbon-13, then covered paper birch seedlings nearby with different bags and injected carbon-14, a different isotopic signature. Then she waited. If trees competed independently, the carbon should stay put, with each tree keeping its own resources, which is Porter's logic applied to photosynthesis. The results broke the model entirely. Within days, carbon-13 from the Douglas fir appeared in the paper birch, and carbon-14 from the birch showed up in the fir. The trees were trading, not just leaking resources accidentally, but actively exchanging them. And the trades weren't random because they flowed toward whichever tree needed them more. Shaded seedlings received more carbon, while stressed trees received more nitrogen, meaning the forest operated as a single economic system rather than a collection of competitors. The mechanism had been beneath the soil the entire time. Mycorrhizal fungi, thread-like organisms thinner than human hair, had woven themselves through the root systems of nearly every tree in the forest. A single fungal network, called a mycorrhizal mat, can connect dozens of trees across multiple species, and some networks span entire mountainsides. The mycologist Paul Stamets has documented fungal networks covering thousands of acres, making them the largest organisms on Earth, invisible until you know where to look. The fungi aren't being altruistic. They take a cut of roughly 30% of the carbon that passes through their network. But in exchange, they provide something trees can't create alone, which is connection. Access to resources beyond their own root zone. Information about drought conditions hundreds of meters away. Early warning systems for pest attacks through chemical signaling. Simard called the largest, oldest trees in these networks mother trees. Not because they're nurturing in some sentimental sense, but because they function as hubs. A single mother tree can connect to hundreds of other trees, and when a mother tree is cut down, the survival rate of seedlings in its network drops by as much as half. The network doesn't just lose a node, it loses its infrastructure. Indigenous knowledge systems understood this for millennia before Western science caught up. The botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer, drawing on Potawatomi tradition, describes what she calls the gift economy of forests, where reciprocity forms the foundation of abundance. Western science took until 1997 to arrive at the same conclusion. Now here's where it connects to everything you think you know about business strategy. The Wood Wide Web isn't just a biological curiosity. It's a blueprint for what economists now call ecosystem strategy, and it explains why the most successful companies of the last 2 decades don't look like competitors at all. They look like forests. Think about what the mycorrhizal network actually does. It doesn't help trees compete better against each other, it changes the game entirely. Instead of fighting over existing resources, the network creates new value. A tree connected to the network has access to more nitrogen, more water, more carbon, and more information than any isolated tree could accumulate on its own. The competition isn't tree versus tree anymore, it's connected forest versus unconnected forest, which is what W. Chan Kim would call a blue ocean, except the forest created it 370 million years before his book. In business terms, the fungi built what Jeffrey Parker calls a platform ecosystem, before James Moore coined the term business ecosystem in Harvard Business Review in 1993. The structure existed in nature, we just didn't have vocabulary for it. And companies that understand this are running circles around those still playing Porter's game. The first principle is that resource circulation beats resource accumulation. In a traditional forest model and traditional business model, success means capturing resources and hoarding them, building moats so competitors can't access what you have. This is the Walmart model and the Standard Oil model. Vertical integration and total control. It's what Porter's framework optimizes for. But the mycorrhizal network works differently because resources circulate. Trees that have excess carbon share it with trees that need it, and when conditions shift through drought, disease, or seasonal changes, the flow reverses. The network stores value in motion, not in static reserves. Amazon figured this out before almost anyone else. When Jeff Bezos opened the Amazon marketplace in 2000, letting third-party sellers compete directly with Amazon's own products, the decision looked like ecological suicide, a dominant tree inviting competitors into its root zone. Why let rivals onto your platform, and why share your customers? The answer is that Amazon wasn't building a tree, it was building a forest. Every third-party seller that joined the platform added inventory. Amazon didn't have to buy, added customer service. Amazon didn't have to staff, and added product knowledge. Amazon didn't have to learn. Amazon did lose some sales to these sellers, but the total value flowing through the system exploded. By 2023, third-party sellers accounted for over 60% of all units sold on Amazon. The platform takes its 30%, the same cut the fungi take, and the ecosystem is worth more than any closed system could ever be. The companies still playing resource accumulation are fighting over smaller and smaller pieces of a static pie, while Amazon's pie grows every quarter. Porter's forces are still operating, they're just operating on a game that matters less and less. That's principle one. And the second principle is what Simard calls preferential transfer, which is the one most businesses get backwards. Resources in the Wood Wide Web don't flow randomly, they flow toward need. When a seedling is shaded by the canopy and struggling to photosynthesize, it receives more carbon from the network. When an older tree fights off a bark beetle infestation, it receives nitrogen and defensive compounds from neighbors. This isn't charity, it's investment. The network benefits when all its nodes survive, because more nodes means more total photosynthesis, which means more carbon entering the system, which means more resources for everyone, including the fungi taking their 30%. Most businesses understand network effects on the demand side, where more users attract more users. But they completely miss network effects on the supply side, and they extract from struggling nodes instead of investing in them. Shopify understood preferential transfer better than almost anyone. When a new merchant joins Shopify, they're struggling because they don't have traffic, they don't have credibility, and they don't have operational knowledge. A traditional platform would treat them as acceptable losses by taking their subscription fee and letting them figure it out or fail. Shopify routes resources towards struggling merchants instead. Their app ecosystem puts tools within reach of sellers who couldn't build them, and Shopify Capital provides loans to merchants who can't get traditional bank financing, with over $5 billion deployed to date. Their educational content coaches merchants through problems Shopify has seen thousands of times before, which is preferential transfer in action. This isn't altruism, it's mycorrhizal logic. Every merchant who survives becomes a larger node in the network, processing more transactions and attracting more customers to Shopify's ecosystem. They build apps that help other merchants grow. Shopify's take rate stays modest at around 2.5% on payments, but the total gross merchandise volume across the network grew from $7.5 billion in 2016 to over $235 billion in 2023. When you compare Shopify's trajectory to traditional e-commerce companies that captured merchants rather than cultivated them, companies that charged maximum fees and provided minimum support, the difference becomes stark. Resource extraction scales arithmetically, while ecosystem cultivation scales exponentially. But here's most businesses get completely wrong, the third one, and it's uncomfortable. In the Wood Wide Web, the most connected trees are also the most vulnerable. Mother trees, the hubs that link hundreds of other trees, are critical to the network's function. When logging companies figured this out, they started specifically targeting mother trees. Cut the hub, crash the network, make room for a profitable monoculture plantation. And it works in the short term because you can absolutely extract value by destroying networks. But Simard's research revealed something else. Mother trees don't just share resources while they're alive. When a mother tree is dying from disease, drought, or chainsaws, it dumps its remaining carbon into the network. Specifically, it routes resources to its offspring and to trees of its own species nearby. It's not anthropomorphizing to say the tree makes a final investment in the future of its network because the chemical gradients are unambiguous. The business parallel is uncomfortable because it asks what you're building that will outlast you and what you're investing in your network's future versus extracting from its present. Apple spent the first decade of the iPhone extracting maximum value from its position, taking 30% of every App Store transaction and maintaining total control over what apps could exist. Developers had no choice because the iPhone was the only game in town, making it a monoculture plantation optimized for short-term yield. That changed when the game shifted. The European Union's Digital Markets Act started forcing interoperability. Epic Games sued, and regulators in Japan, South Korea, and the Netherlands circled. Apple's most important developers started building cross-platform, hedging their bets against a platform that treated them as resources to extract rather than nodes to cultivate. Look at Apple's strategic shift since 2020. Services revenue is up, but the composition has changed. Apple is investing heavily in developer tools, developer education, and developer relationships, and they reduced the take rate to 15% for small developers. This didn't happen because Tim Cook had a spiritual awakening. It happened because Apple realized they'd been logging mother trees. The network that created their dominance was becoming brittle, and repair required preferential transfer to nodes they'd been extracting from. Microsoft's turnaround under Satya Nadella is an even clearer example. Ballmer's Microsoft was a monoculture plantation that was efficient, profitable, and one pest away from collapse. Linux was the enemy, and open source was a cancer in Ballmer's words. Developers who didn't commit fully to Microsoft's stack were traitors to be punished. Nadella didn't fix Microsoft. He stopped Microsoft from fighting. Microsoft joined the Linux Foundation and acquired GitHub, the central hub of open source development, making it free for public repositories. They rebuilt Microsoft Teams around interoperability rather than lock-in, and Azure became the cloud platform most friendly to non-Microsoft technologies. They became the fungi instead of the tree. The stock price tells you it wasn't charity. Microsoft's market cap went from roughly $300 billion when Nadella took over in 2014 to over $3 trillion by 2024. By becoming a fungal network instead of a competing tree, and by routing resources toward developer needs, instead of capturing developers behind walls, Microsoft became 10 times more valuable than it had ever been while trying to dominate. The fourth principle is that information flows are worth more than resource flows. The Wood Wide Web doesn't just transfer carbon and nitrogen, it transfers information. When a tree on the edge of a forest is attacked by aphids, chemical signals travel through the fungal network to trees deeper in the forest. Those trees, which can't see the aphids, can't smell them, and have no direct contact with the threat, begin producing defensive compounds before the aphids arrive. The network runs an early warning system where information about threats travels faster than the threats themselves. Trees that aren't connected don't get the signal, and they get eaten. This is why the most valuable platforms aren't the ones moving the most goods, they're the ones moving the most information. In 2010, Japanese researchers placed a slime mold called Physarum polycephalum on a map of Tokyo with food sources positioned at major train stations. The slime mold, with no brain and no central planning, grew a network connecting the food sources, and that network was nearly identical to the Tokyo rail system that human engineers had spent decades planning. The slime mold found the same optimal routes through decentralized, information-rich decisions. Uber operates on the same principle. When Uber entered the taxi market, everyone focused on the price disruption because Uber was cheaper than cabs. But the lasting competitive advantage wasn't price, since that got competed away by Lyft and local alternatives. The advantage was information. Uber knows where people want to go before they get there and knows surge patterns before surges happen. They know which neighborhoods are underserved, which drivers are reliable, and which routes are fastest. Every ride adds information to the network, which makes the next ride more efficient, which attracts more riders, which adds more information. The network optimizes itself, just like slime mold and just like mycorrhizal fungi finding the shortest path between trees. Traditional taxi companies owned cars, while Uber owned something worth more, the informational mycelium of urban transportation. The principle applies beyond tech. The best real estate brokers aren't the ones who own the most properties, they're the ones plugged into the most information flows, knowing who's thinking about selling, which neighborhoods are shifting, and what prices are actually closing versus asking. The best venture capitalists aren't the ones with the most capital, they're the ones whose networks surface the best deals before they hit the market. Y Combinator doesn't have the most money, they have the most information about what's working in startups, flowing through their network of over 4,000 founders. Resource advantages can be copied while information network advantages compound. Now, I should acknowledge something because ecosystem strategy isn't automatically good. Networks can be parasitic. WeWork tried to position itself as a platform ecosystem by connecting freelancers, enabling collaboration, and building community. But WeWork extracted value from its network without creating proportional value in return. The 30% the fungi take is payment for services rendered, including connection, information, and resource routing. WeWork's take was for vibes, and the network collapsed because the economics never supported the ecosystem framing. Theranos claimed to be building a health information network, but in reality it was mimicking the signals of an ecosystem company while operating as a fraud. Parasitic mimicry exists in forests too because some plants tap into mycorrhizal networks and extract resources without contributing, which is the forest equivalent of a grifter. The lesson isn't that building an ecosystem means you'll succeed. The lesson is to understand whether you're genuinely creating network value or just using ecosystem language to justify extraction. So what does all this mean for you? What Suzanne Simard discovered beneath the Douglas firs in British Columbia, and what the most successful companies of the last 2 decades stumbled onto independently, is a unified principle about how complex systems actually thrive. Resource circulation beats accumulation. Preferential transfer to struggling nodes strengthens the whole network. Hub nodes should invest in the network's future, not extract from it. And information flows are worth more than resource flows. These aren't separate strategies. They're expressions of the same underlying truth that in connected systems, your success depends on the success of your network more than your success against your network. Porter's 5 Forces, the competitive playbook that dominated business strategy for 40 years, works in isolated, zero-sum games like chess, tennis, and price wars for commodity products. But most interesting markets aren't isolated anymore because they're ecosystems. And in ecosystems, the tree that hoards while the forest burns ends up alone in a desert. The mycorrhizal model predicts something uncomfortable for AI companies right now. The ones building closed models by hoarding data, restricting access, and treating developers as threats are building trees. The ones building open ecosystems, even at short-term cost, are building forests. Meta open-sourced El Llama, Mistral distributes weights freely, and Hugging Face is becoming the GitHub of machine learning. In 10 years, we'll know which bet paid off, and if the forest logic holds, it won't be the model with the best benchmarks, it'll be the network with the most connections. Next time you're building a strategy, ask yourself the question Simard's forests answered 370 million years ago. Are you building a tree or a forest? Are you trying to capture value from a fixed pie or create new value by connecting nodes that couldn't connect themselves? Are you extracting from your network or investing in it? The best competitive strategies aren't built with moats and walls. They're built with mycorrhizal logic, where resources flow toward need, information moves faster than threats, and your success is tied inextricably to the success of your ecosystem. Porter gave you vocabulary for fighting while Simard gave you vocabulary for thriving. The choice is yours. The Wood Wide Web and competitive strategy. 2 fields that seem completely unrelated, but the underlying structure connects everywhere once you see it. That's what we do here, finding hidden architectures that link unrelated domains, same principles, different materials. If you want to see how evolutionary immune systems explain why startups fail, or how cathedral builders understood software architecture better than most software architects, subscribe. Next week, we're covering why jazz improvisation is the operating system of effective teams. Drop a comment telling me the most extractive business practice you've seen destroy its own ecosystem because I want to hear the horror stories. And let me know what company you think is quietly building a forest while everyone else fights over trees.